Welcome back to Elementary Statistics. We are in part 24. We're going to be looking at some applied examples of statistics. This is to help students kind of understand the importance of this. A lot of times in high school, I remember in math, especially in junior high and high school, I should say, they just were like, oh, you know this stuff so that you can pass the SAT. And of course, the first thing a kid's thinking is, hey, I just won't take the SAT. And that's a very logical thing to get rid of if that's what we're learning something for, only just to pass a test. So one of the things that we can use statistics in is pretty much anytime we need to measure the effectiveness of something. And I'm going to use an example here in fitness. When I'm looking at a program, let's say that I'm trying to, whether it's lose fat or gain muscle or do a combination of those things. So following what we've learned so far in statistics, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some assumptions up front. In other words, we're going to throw out what we know based on the current knowledge. We don't know if this is 100% true, but here's some of the assumptions in the case of this fitness here, and that is it is impossible to lose fat and gain muscle simultaneously. That's the first assumption. There may be exceptions for newbies. As I say here, it is true that people who are new to fitness sometimes do gain muscle and lose fat at the same time or appear to. The other assumption here that I've heard a lot, not 100% sure how much this is true, but it definitely is thrown around a lot, which is 1 pound of fat equals 3,500 calories, while 1 pound of muscle equals 600 calories. So a lot of times when people say they lost 4 pounds in a week or whatnot, there's no possible way they lost 4 pounds of fat in a week. What happened is they probably lost some muscle, some fat. They may have lost some water weight or some muscle glycogen. Those things are common. But a lot of times when people are talking about they lost 4 pounds of fat, you would have had to burn 14,000 calories in a week, and that's a lot. That's like jump roping. What is it? For like 14 hours. Well, not quite. Maybe about 10 hours. That's a lot of jump rope. Well, more than 10 hours, about 11 hours. Another one here is when the body releases insulin, it is impossible to lose fat since insulin is a storage hormone. Insulin is required to gain muscle, however, so it's going to store glycogen for muscle, but it's also going to prevent fat loss. And then another assertion that I've heard by Dr. Rhonda Patrick is that the human body is optimized to gain muscle over a 9-hour period of time. In other words, everything after 9 hours cannot be muscle. I don't know how that works, but I definitely have heard this assertion. I thought it was very interesting, is that only within a 9-hour window you can gain muscle, which that just seems very bizarre. But anyway, that at least is an assertion made. In general, the science behind intermittent fasting, if this is part of that, is highly questionable in my opinion because, for one, they have not studied ceteris paribus. We do not know if intermittent fasting is effective for someone who does it for 5 years or 1 year or 2 years, or for people who are physically fit versus not physically fit. We just don't know that. And then if you look at the intermittent fasting studies done in general, they are very small sample sizes. I don't consider a couple of hundred big enough. The reason why the nuts study, I think that's a great study, is because there was over 100,000 people that were tested. That's a pretty large sample size. You can come to some good conclusions with that many people. You're talking a couple hundred people. No, you can't come to very many conclusions. You say you can, but really that's just not enough. And the reason is because humans are so genetically diverse. So there's a lot with the intermittent fasting that I question. A person can gain a maximum of 25 pounds of muscle a year without drugs, provided they aren't a newbie. Again, and newbies may be able to gain more. This assumes that someone does everything right. So if you do everything perfectly, the maximum amount of muscle, at least that I've been told, that you can gain in a year is 25 pounds naturally. Okay, so that may or may not be wrong. Maybe it's 30 is the max, maybe 20 is the max, who knows. And then, of course, a significant increase in strength is generally followed by some increase in muscle mass. Again, there are exceptions to this rule. When I say significant increase, I mean, let's think of a barbell and dumbbells together as 30 pounds. So like, for instance, if you're bench pressing 180 and you suddenly bench press 210, that would be a significant increase. Anything less than that would be moderate to small increase. Or in the dumbbell example, let's say you're doing overhead press of 50 and you go from 50 to, what would that be, 65 on each. So that would be a 30-pound increase. More than likely, you've gained some muscle in order to do that. I cannot think of a situation in which a significant increase in strength happened while there was a loss of muscle. I'm not saying that's not possible. That's pretty rare. I've seen people gain some strength and lose some muscle, but they didn't gain 30 pounds of strength. over a period of time. Again, that may be possible to do. It's just unlikely. And then as the body gets lower in fat percentages as a total of body weight, the body will be reluctant in fat loss. That's another assumption. More assumptions here. When the body does not have access to carbohydrates, it will use glycogen from the liver and muscles, then use fat. So it will deplete the glycogen from the liver and the muscles. That's generally what people lose when they say, oh, I lost 4 pounds. What they lost was a lot of glycogen, a lot of water, and then they lost some fat and maybe some muscle. And of course, assuming the body has a need for muscle, muscle loss should be less than if the body does not have a need to maintain muscle. Again, this is an assumption. The idea is if there's a proof that muscle is needed, I mean, if there's no proof that the muscle is needed, then the body has no qualms with letting go of muscle, right? Because the body does prefer, or I shouldn't say prefer, but the body does see a need for fat gaining or fat maintenance, or retaining fat, I should say, because there is a purpose for fat in periods of starvation. And then, of course, some muscle is lost when fat is lost. Though this may worsen if there's no need for muscle, don't use it, you lose it, okay? Low carbohydrate is good for fat loss, but muscle gain, but not for muscle gain or maintenance, and that's true. As long as you have glycogen, I don't, this would be another assumption that I didn't put on here, but it's like you cannot lose muscle provided that your muscles have glycogen. So far as I can tell, there's no way that you can lose muscle fiber as long as you have glycogen in your muscles, which means as long as your muscles are storing glycogen, you cannot lose muscle mass. That's, again, I don't know if that's true, but that would appear to be the case. So first, muscle glycogen has to be depleted. Well, if you get enough carbs in a day, your muscle glycogen is going to be full. Therefore, it is not possible to lose muscle as long as you're getting enough carbohydrates. Again, that's an assumption. Can't prove that either. But that appears to be the case the way the human body works. And then once I get to a fat loss target of anywhere from 8 to 11% on non-gain days, I typically aim for a negative 200 calories to offset any possible fat gain on muscle days. The assumption here is that these will offset each other. I can't prove that either, but that's the assumption. And then, of course, it's very important to write out the goal anytime you begin a fitness program. And it's also good for statistics because then you know what to compare. This is also very important just along with the assumptions. So energy, discipline, health, strength, and aesthetics. That would be the order in my case, but for you, it depends, and that way you know what to measure. Energy and discipline are a lot harder to measure, and health, although you can do blood tests for health. Strength, very easy to measure, and then aesthetics. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this video because it's easiest in terms of comparing when we're talking about statistics. Energy and discipline, though, and health, a little bit harder. Health is going to be blood test. This is the site for the hypertrophy-specific training. They have the protocol here. This is one of the protocols I use, so you can go to that site and see that's kind of a breakdown, but it's probably going to be really small on your screen because it's small on my screen as well. Another thing, step 2 is ceteris paribus measurements. This is very important. So we talked about in statistics, we want to admit our assumptions up front. We're going to run with those assumptions. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to have ceteris paribus measurements. What does that mean? We're trying to only change one variable and keep all other variables the same. So let me give you a simple example of this with diet. Let's suppose we're going to change the diet. Then we don't want to change the fitness program. If we change both the fitness program and the diet, what affected things, right? Which was more effective, the diet program or the fitness program, right? So it's important that when we change things one variable at a time, and we wait a period of time. And I don't put this on the video, I'm sorry, I don't put this on this slide, but I put it on another slide. I prefer to use a 6 to 10 week period to test something. It is not a large enough sample size to try something for 1 or 2 weeks. In fact, if I was ever, I don't, but if I ever had clients, let's say that I was doing for like weight loss or whatnot, and I would not, this is not something I'm interested in doing, but if I did, I wouldn't allow them to measure themselves for the first 3 weeks. They need to be just focused on building the habit of fitness and eating healthy. We'll get into how much fat they're losing, but the reason why I say that is because a lot of times people lose a lot of weight the first week because they're losing water, glycogen, a little bit of fat and some muscle, and then the next week they don't lose that much, and it's because they've already flushed out the water and the glycogen, so they're not going to lose that again. And then they sit there and they get depressed, and it's like, no, you're already getting distracted, and so that's, to me, a mistake. Okay, so when we talk about losing fat or gaining muscle or whatever it is, it's important to recognize that there has to be enough time before we figure out the patterns, right? And so the next thing is when we're looking at the measurements, we do want to assume ceteris paribus. So use the same outfits. Unless you want to be fashionable, there is no reason. When you're buying fitness clothes, buy 20 years worth of fitness clothes. It's a good inflation adjuster too, because you won't have to worry about the costs going up. So rather than buy a few shirts and pants, buy enough shirts to last 10 to 20 years of fitness, shrink them in the laundry, and then store the excess for later use. You can, let's say, mix up with, let's say, 2 or 3 fitness shirts a week, 2 or 3 fitness pants a week. There you're done. Same everything from company to size, though you want to adjust depending on goal. Let's say you're trying to lose weight and you want to start with a large and then go to a medium, so then buy the larges and buy the medium, and then you have your ceteris paribus measurement. By the way, this is very effective. Shirts and pants, very effective, because once it's pre-shrunk, when you go to the gym regularly and you do the wash, and people say, well, in the wash it shrinks over time. True, but when you go to the gym, it stretches, so it's going to offset each other over time. And so what will happen is you will be able to tell, shirts are a great example of that. If you gain, like over this period of time, I gained a lot of weight. I say a lot, but some relative to the muscle size in the traps. Well, what happened was my shirts they appeared to shorten. Well, what's really happening is height is being gained in the traps, not head, but in terms of the traps are being gained. So what happens is that pulls all the shirts up an inch. And so you'll start to see things like that. And shirts and pants are really great. You'll see same thing with pants as well. That got tighter on where the glutes are. And then of course use a mirror weekly or body fat measurement for body fat measurement. Or images too. Some people prefer images. Mirrors, very helpful, but don't use a mirror daily. You're not going to see much progress. I have no desire, for the record, to use DEXA scans, and I'm not going to drop money on these stupid water submersions. I've seen people that have said, "Oh, my water submersion is 8%," and I've looked at them and I'm like, I wouldn't like that result. I mean, if that's 8%. But DEXA scans, they have radiation. I mean, this is not a safe thing to do, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. No purpose of it. And again, I've seen people that have DEXA scan results that are like, 8 to 9%. And it's like, yeah, but if I saw that in the mirror, I wouldn't be satisfied. So the mirror is the most effective. And I actually got that idea from somebody at the bodybuilding.com forums. Really a smart guy. He's just like, look, if you don't like what you're seeing in the mirror, then it doesn't matter what, a DEXA scan or a water submerser or whatever they're called shows. And he's exactly right. And then, of course, compare baseline exercises at key points every month. It's very important. This is another ceteris paribus. So squats. Compare how much weight and how many reps, right? So same amount of reps, so have baseline exercises. I'm going to squat. Well, let's say I do it to failure. I'm going to squat to failure. I'm going to see if I can increase the reps and weight, right? On these baseline exercises. Same thing with pull-ups. Pull-ups would be to failure, okay? And then change as few variables as possible at a time, i.e. if I'm changing the fitness program, then I don't change the diet. If I'm changing the diet, I don't change the fitness program. Okay, very important. Try to change few, otherwise it's hard to know what had the effect. Okay, so 2 programs were tried in the last 20, 24, 25 weeks. First one was the HST program, and this was high carbohydrate on weight days. This would be training days, I should have said, not weight days. And then low carbohydrate on lists. This would be low intensity, steady state cardio. It's kind of like just walking 4 miles an hour on the non-workout days. That was a protocol. Then there was a 3-day program, 3 days of working out, following an upper, lower, small protocol. So upper, I said this wrong. It should be large, lower, small. So large muscles would be like the chest and the back. And then, of course, the lower would be all of the lower body. And then the small would be like the deltoids, the biceps, triceps, traps. And on this protocol, very similar. High carbohydrate on the 3 days. These were 3 days in a row. Low carbohydrate on the other 4 days. The purpose of this was during the fat loss days, was to stack up the fat loss days together. So the idea was, more than likely, I was going into ketosis on like the last 2 of those 4 days, possibly, maybe just 1 of those days. But the idea is to have the fat loss days together and then to have the muscle gain days together. And I think to put this somewhere else in a different slide, but the idea is what I felt is going into the workout days, I felt very flat. So, because all the muscle glycogen is depleted, etc. But at the end of the workout days, I felt very full in terms of the muscle glycogen is refilled, etc., etc. Because after 3 days in a row of a lot of carbs. And then, of course, the goal would be during the workout days, which is 3, whether it's HST program or 3-day program, would be to gain 0.3 pounds of muscle, and during the fat loss days, lose 0.5 pounds of fat. Or if I get to the lowest point of fat that I need, the body gets very stubborn of letting go of fat once I get below or get around 10 to 11% in general, then of course it's going to, then the goal is just to keep fat off. And by the way, that comes out annually to 15 pounds of muscle, 26 pounds of fat. Remember that the ideal amount of muscle gained is 25, and that's if you do everything perfect. I then say, okay, well, what about Tim doing 20 pounds? Well, the idea is you have to be, you'd have to assume that you lose no muscle, and I know that's going to happen. So the 15 pounds is assuming that I do it pretty well and I still lose a little bit of muscle. That's why it's 15 instead of 20. Even if you don't intend to lose muscle, you're probably going to lose a little. Okay, food intake. So all carbohydrates on high carbohydrate days are consumed within 2 hours from the finish of a workout. And then, of course, let's see, fasted workouts for focus and energy. Yeah, fasted workouts, generally waxy maize for carbs. I don't like eating, period, so that works. And then, of course, meals are consumed within 8 hours, ideally, except off days when a meal is consumed within 2 hours. So the one day that I'm off, I'll just eat over a 2-hour period of time. Up to 120 grams of protein on low carbohydrate days, as too much protein may lead to gluconeogenesis. That's basically when the body tries to convert protein into glucose. And then, of course, 110 grams of protein. What is that? 440 kcalories. Oh, yeah, this is the example. So up to 110 grams of protein, as you see, 150 grams of fat, 25 grams of carbs. That would be about 1,800, or about 1,900 actually calories. And then, of course, I count fiber as a carbohydrate. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as a negative carb. Everyone can have their own opinion on that, but I don't believe anyone who says there's a negative carb. Most of the negative carb is marketing hype that allows people to cram sugar into products, because they can put 20 grams of sugar, they can put 15 grams of fiber, and they can say, hey, there's only 5 grams of carbs. And yeah, I don't buy that. So the results in general on the HST program definitely saw outstanding results in terms of aesthetics and energy, but really not as much strength gains. Remember, I can compare ceteris paribus and strength gains. For instance, you can compare, let's say, your bench press, the amount that you're doing, same reps, same strength. That in and of itself is a useful algorithm, is how much each rep counts at a higher weight or the same weight, etc. But that makes it very easy to compare. In terms of energy, like I said, it's a little harder and vaguer, but I'm going to focus more on the strengths and the aesthetics here, and then the strength and the aesthetics here, just because we have the measurements in place going back to this. And then baseline exercises, yeah, that was what I also used to determine strength. It helps to have a fitness journal for sure, and then outfits. As far as size, I didn't put this on here, but yes, I did see an increase in some muscles. Glutes, definitely some weight gain on the HST program, and glutes, traps, some delts, definitely back. It's hard to see the front side. Of course, the other thing too is if you gain weight in the back, you might be gaining some weight in the chest and you just don't notice it. On the 3-day program, less energy. Did not see huge energy gain. I don't think my body does very well on too many days in a row in terms of working out, and then too many days off in a row. I realize that that's nutritionally optimal, but not so much energetically optimal. But I did gain significant strength. Almost all of my workouts were up. A lot of my workouts, I should say, were up over 30 pounds. Some of them were up as much as 50. And then, of course, in general, more frequent workouts throughout the week help. Yeah, for me, it helps more to have more frequent workouts. And then very flat, like I said before, the first workout day, but very bulk the last workout day. I'm going to go back to this point on carbohydrates in 2 hours. Let me see if I can draw this. This is something that a doctor showed me one time, and there may be exceptions to this. Whoops. Well, I like how that does that. So I'll just kind of show you the statistical reasons why I do what I do with the carbs in 2 hours. So let's go here. That's that works. So let's draw this. I'm not going to draw this perfectly. Whoops. It's just going to wipe that out. Okay, I'm not going to care that much, just because it's not going to be perfect. Okay. So if we assume that this right here is time, and this right here is insulin, one of the things that he was pointing out is, I'll use green for carbs. So let's say that, okay, so I have my workout, and then I take the 200 grams, or whatever it is, 300, 400 grams of carbs. So I'm going to spike the carbs. I'm going to eat it over a 2-hour period of time. So this is the 2-hour window, and then it goes to 0, right? Or very few, and a lot of this is, just very few. Okay, what he was saying is what insulin does is insulin will, I'm going to have to raise this up a little, but insulin will basically exceed the levels to control the carbs. But here's the point. Even though this is over a 2-hour period of time, and remember that insulin is required to gain muscle, but when insulin is released, we can't lose fat. It will taper off, but it does not immediately decline from what he was explaining. In other words, it does kind of like this throughout the day, right? So even though going here, even though I stopped all carbohydrates at this point, right? So I stopped all the carbs here. Look at what happens with the insulin effect, right? And so the idea is, if we think about this on days in terms of gaining muscle, and the assumption that over a 9-hour period of time, if that turns out to be true, maybe we could say this happens over a 9-hour period. That may be why. Even though there's a lot of doubt that I have. I think that's part of the intermittent fasting hype. Actually, I can kind of scroll this up here. But the idea is that the insulin does not just suddenly stop being released. And that's the point. Like, just because I cut off the carbs doesn't mean that the insulin immediately drops down. And so this is kind of the logic behind, you cannot lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. Because when you are gaining muscle, insulin is released. When you're losing fat, insulin is not released. If I was not having any carbs, in theory, the idea is insulin is never released unless there's something else that someone is doing that is releasing insulin. And I will say that artificial sweeteners, it's very interesting, but artificial sweeteners, there does seem to be some evidence that they may have an impact on insulin. I don't like artificial sweeteners either. That's another thing that I try to stay away from. A lot of people will try to come up with excuses or reasons to have those, but a lot of those haven't been studied. And remember that sample size has to be large enough to come to conclusions. We don't know if our body is tricked into thinking that because something is sweet, it releases insulin in terms of prepping for it, and then if there's no sugar. So I would be very careful about artificial sweeteners. That's not to say not have any, but I would definitely see how your body responds to artificial sweeteners before assuming that it has no impact whatsoever. So anyway, that's just something that I use. I had a program that I used in college, and I never wrote it down, and I wish I did because it was a very effective program. So I wanted to keep track of this one. But in general, this follows some of the principles that we've learned in statistics up to this point, which is number one, admit your assumptions. Number two, find your ceteris paribus measurements, make sure to be as accurate as possible. And three, get a large enough sample size. This is kind of what we're doing here. I mean, the 6 to 10 week program is to consider effectiveness. Then kind of map out your roadmap here, and then of course look at the results. So we've applied what we've learned in statistics. So the next time you think about, and this is for the students here, is like your teacher says, oh, well, you just need to pass a test. Well, no, you can actually use statistics very pragmatically, just like you can use basic addition, subtraction, etc. to measure I could like measure the amount of, let's say, percent strength I gained or whatnot. Math is very pragmatic, but so is statistics. And this is something that you can personally use all the time. And the assumptions are something that, I'll go read a lot of studies at the NIH, and I have to assume that some of these studies have validity. We can't know all of those things, but as you do tests like this on your body, you'll become more familiar with how it works, and statistics will really help you minimize the amount of errors and the amount of time that you waste when you're trying to do these things.